In 2018, a little-known republic nestled deep in the heart of Central Asia devised what appeared to be a brilliant strategy to halt the widespread exodus of skilled and educated workers, a challenge that afflicts many developing nations worldwide. Its solution was straightforward. It simply stopped allowing anyone to leave, effectively transforming the entire country into a virtual prison twice the size of the United Kingdom. Indeed, Turkmenistan touts itself as a nation of pragmatic solutions. That same year, then-President Berdimuhamedov, attributing bad luck to the presence of black cars, banned their importation. Soon, citizens across the country began waking up to find that their cars had vanished overnight, having been towed away by the authorities. To get them back, owners were forced to pay for a repaint, often at unaffordable prices. Before long, this unusual mandate was extended to include all colored cars. Hence, should you ever find yourself scanning satellite images of Turkmenistan, you'll be met with a monochromatic sea of white vehicles, which just so happens to be the former president's favorite color. But Berdimuhamedov's eccentricities pale in comparison to his predecessor, Niyazov, self-titled as His Excellency, the great leader of the Turkmen and God's prophet on earth. In a grandiose display of concern for his nation's health, Niyazov carved a colossal 37-kilometer staircase into the Kopet Dag mountain range. He mandated that politicians climb it yearly in a so-called health walk, while he watched from above in a helicopter before chastising them at the finish line for their slow pace. The array of bewildering decrees issued by Turkmenistan's leaders appears limitless. Days of the week, months of the year, breeds of horses, and even craters on the moon have been personally renamed to the preferences of whichever leader is in charge at the time. At one point, Niyazov literally renamed bread after his mother. Another bizarre incident saw him advise citizens to chew on bones to enhance dental health, citing the absence of dogs in dental offices as his justification. Dogs, however, have become scarce in the capital on account of them being banned for their, quote, unappealing odor. This prohibition is just one of many in a relentless series of efforts over the last 3 decades aimed at transforming the capital city into an immaculate, pristine, and grand vision of a dictator's personal paradise. Vast neighborhoods have been reduced to rubble to make way for a breathtaking number of skyscrapers, monuments, parks, stadiums, and palaces, each crafted from impeccable Italian marble and then lined with gold. So much marble has been used to build the city that it earned it a Guinness World Record, along with the largest indoor pool, the largest indoor Ferris wheel, the largest architectural star, and the most fountain pools in a public space, an irony given the country's severe water scarcity. But beyond the grandeur of its gleaming marble city and the often comical antics of its leaders, little about Turkmenistan is amusing for those forced to live within its borders. In August 2023, a distressing scene unfolded in the extensive cotton fields of Turkmenistan's Lebap province. Beneath the sweltering heat exceeding 104 degrees Fahrenheit, tens of thousands toiled tirelessly by hand to gather the annual cotton harvest. While the sight of diligent laborers in cotton fields is not by itself unusual, the composition of this workforce was anything but ordinary. Instead of seasonal agricultural workers, this vast sea of labor comprised teachers, doctors, lawyers, flight attendants, state workers, and even school children, none of whom were there by choice or paid. Under a presidential decree, both state agencies and private companies forced half of their staff to pick cotton during the week, with full participation required on weekends. Facing the risk of public humiliation and job loss, a daunting prospect in a country with a staggering 70% unemployment rate, workers reluctantly complied as they struggled to meet their daily cotton quota of 55 pounds. Ever since gaining independence from the Soviet Union, Turkmenistan's leaders have painstakingly reinstated Stalinist rule. Today, the country stands as one of the last true totalitarian dictatorships. Secret police resort to torture and use psychotropic drugs against political opponents. Those perceived as enemies of the state are publicly paraded on live television, coerced into confessions, and forced to beg for mercy to spare their families from similar fates. Afterwards, they vanish without a trace. Mere criticism of the government in any form is deemed treasonous, often resulting in lengthy prison sentences, confinement to psychiatric facilities, or exile to the desolate salt flats by the Caspian Sea. the level of repression is so extreme that last year, Turkmenistan was ranked as the second worst country in the world for freedom, a position even lower than Taliban-controlled Afghanistan, war-torn Eritrea, and the infamous North Korea. But with the transition of power from Berdi Muhammadov to his son in 2022, marking Central Asia's first hereditary secession since the era of the Khans, hope for improvement in the near future has all but been extinguished. It's hardly surprising then that many are desperate to leave in search of a better life elsewhere, assuming the government does not successfully stop them first. But how did Turkmenistan become such a dystopian nightmare? How do its leaders maintain such an absolute grip on power? And where does the seemingly endless supply of money that sustains the regime come from? This is the story of Turkmenistan, the strangest dictatorship in the world. Today's video is sponsored by War Thunder, the unrivaled king of vehicle combat gaming, with an expanded arsenal boasting over 2,500 planes, tanks, ships, and helicopters, representing 10 major nations. Every model is a masterpiece of detail from its engine to the last rivet. And if you're anything like me, you'll find yourself completely absorbed by the authentic sounds, hyper-realistic graphics, and a comprehensive technological journey from the 1920s all the way to modern warfare. For enthusiasts of military history, there's simply no better game out there. So dive into the action with me and 70 million others today on PC, PlayStation 4 and 5, or Xbox One and Xbox Series X and S absolutely free by clicking my exclusive link in the description below. Whether you're signing up for the first time or returning after a hiatus of at least 6 months, you'll unlock a massive welcome package, including premium vehicles, a one-of-a-kind 3D vehicle decorator, 100,000 silver lions, and an upgraded account. But don't delay, this is a limited time offer. On September 9, 1879, Russian military forces began a severe bombardment of Göktepe, a city encircled by a formidable wall made out of mud, 18 feet thick and 10 feet tall, sheltering 40,000 Turkmen. Despite their technological advantages, the Russian troops, limited in number and supplies, suffered heavy losses in their frontal assault on the city, forcing a strategic retreat to their base on the Caspian Sea. Driven by objectives to secure its southern frontier, advance its economic interests, and enhance its global stature, Russia had been gradually expanding its dominion over Central Asia. But the humiliating defeat at Göktepe marked Russia's first major setback in its imperial goals in 164 years. Located at the southern fringe of Central Asia, Göktepe was located in what is today modern Turkmenistan. The area was primarily inhabited by nomadic tribes who roamed the extensive Karakum Desert, subsisting on livestock herding and raiding passing trade caravans. Despite the harshness of their existence, these tribes earned a reputation for their fierce resistance to external powers and their involvement in the slave trade, a brutal reality that some of the encroaching Russians experienced firsthand. Recognizing Göktepe's strategic importance for conquering the rest of the region, Russia began a more calculated second attack 2 years after their initial defeat. On January 12, 1881, they detonated a tunnel packed with thousands of kilograms of explosives beneath the city's wall. This created a 140-foot wide breach in the city's defenses, enabling Russian forces to flood in. Following a ruthless massacre of the city's residents, the rest of Central Asia soon fell to the Tsar. Over the next 4 decades, Russia made little effort to assimilate the region or its inhabitants into the empire. Although railroads expanded and new cities like Ashgabat emerged, spurred by an influx of Russian migrants, the region's predominantly desert terrain, making up 90% of its geography, hindered any real development. By the eve of World War I, the industrial sector remained modest, comprising only a few cotton gins, leather processing facilities, and a single steam engine manufacturing plant. By 1916, amid the escalating challenges of a war turning against him, Tsar Nicholas II made the controversial decision to conscript Turkestani Muslims who had until then been exempt from military service. This decision, combined with a corrupt and oppressive local government, ignited widespread revolts across Central Asia, further fueled by the Russian Revolution the following year. For 8 years, the region was engulfed in severe turmoil, featuring a mix of warfare, revolution, famine, and devastating reforms. Eventually, the Soviet Union emerged from the ashes of the Russian Empire, forcefully bringing Central Asia along in its socialist transformation. By 1924, the last major remnants of resistance had been crushed, and Central Asia was reorganized into distinct ethno-national political entities. Among these, the Turkmen Soviet Socialist Republic was formally established. In line with the sweeping changes occurring across the Union, the state confiscated all land and forcibly integrated the nomadic population into state-run and collective farms. Concurrently, the government introduced a standardized Turkmen written language and established numerous publishing houses and schools. These initiatives were designed to boost literacy rates, reduce intertribal conflicts, and align the population with Soviet ideals. These measures, together with the violent suppression of political dissent, transformed Turkmenistan into a docile, isolated, and largely overlooked republic within the Soviet sphere. Despite this, several key developments heavily influenced its evolving character. The first of these occurred during the Second World War, as German armies captured significant parts of the Soviet Union's industrial heartland. Many industries were relocated to safer locations, including Central Asia. Turkmenistan received 2 oil processing plants from Azerbaijan, a metal processing plant from southern Russia, and approximately 24 textile plants. However, due to limited infrastructure and an underdeveloped energy sector, these developments were relatively modest compared to the other republics. Following the war, Turkmenistan remained under-industrialized due to a policy of regionalization. This policy allocated distinct economic roles to each republic based on their unique resources, geographical advantages, and workforce capabilities, all aimed at enhancing the Soviet Union's collective economic performance. More importantly, though, it deliberately made each republic economically dependent on the rest of the Union, thereby reinforcing centralized control. While Turkmenistan's harsh natural conditions were generally unfavorable for many types of economic activities, they were uniquely suited for the cultivation of cotton, a commodity in which the Soviets were determined to achieve self-sufficiency. However, the country's lack of significant water seemed to make the dream of transforming Turkmenistan into a cotton powerhouse unobtainable. That changed when Soviet planners designed what would become one of the largest canals in history. Construction of the Karakum Canal began in 1954, and by 1967, it was channeling 3.2 cubic miles of water annually from the Amu Darya River almost to the Caspian Sea, tripling the republic's arable land and its cotton production. Cotton harvests eventually became so immense, it led to the use of forced in-child labor to compensate for the republic's limited workforce. By 1988, children were missing up to 68 school days a year to work in the cotton fields. Due to the policy of regionalization, 97% of the cotton was then shipped directly to Russia for processing, which left Turkmenistan excluded from the industry's value-added benefits and employment opportunities. A similar pattern emerged with the surprising discovery and exploitation of Turkmenistan's most vital resource, natural gas. The first deposits were initially found in the 1930s, but it was not until the 1960s that the republic's truly enormous reserves were confirmed. With an estimated 50 trillion cubic meters of natural gas, Turkmenistan found itself holding the 4th largest reserves in the world and the 2nd highest on a per capita basis. By the mid-1980s, production had soared to 72 billion cubic meters annually, second only to Russia itself. Just as with cotton, all of Turkmenistan's natural gas was transported to Russia for processing through a single pipeline. Consistent with the Soviet strategy of subsidizing its economy with artificially low-priced energy, Turkmenistan received only 6 kopecks per 1,000 cubic meters of gas, a rate that was 300 times less than global market prices. In effect, Turkmenistan was essentially being stripped of its natural wealth for the benefit of the other republics. As a result, by the late 1980s, Turkmenistan's per capita income stood at only 70% of the Soviet average, with most of the population living below the official poverty line. Although social indicators had improved from the pre-Soviet era, with notable successes such as achieving full literacy, the republic still suffered from low life expectancy and the highest infant mortality rate in the Union. Further complicating the picture, though, was the leadership's tendency to inflate these figures to enhance their status within the Communist Party. This malpractice led to the removal of Turkmenistan's first secretary in favor of Saparmurat Niyazov amid a 1985 anti-corruption crackdown. Born in 1940 in a small village near Ashgabat, Niyazov was orphaned after the Second World War claimed his father, and a devastating earthquake took his mother and 2 brothers 6 years later. Raised by a distant relative, Niyazov excelled academically, pursued electrical engineering, and joined the Communist Party in 1962. He quickly rose through its ranks, supported by his affiliation with the Teke, the republic's dominant tribe. Upon becoming first secretary of Turkmenistan, Niyazov transformed the Turkmen Communist Party into one of the most rigid and conservative factions within the Soviet Union. Confronted with widespread shortages, economic stagnation, and social reforms that spurred turmoil in other republics, Niyazov gained notoriety for his ruthless suppression of any unrest. Despite these conditions, resistance within Turkmenistan was surprisingly minimal, due in part to the predominantly rural and agricultural nature of its populace. Shaped by decades of Soviet influence, a deep-rooted conservatism fostered a culture of acquiescence to authority. Additionally, Turkmenistan's lack of history as an independent nation-state prior to its incorporation into the Russian Empire meant there were few nationalistic impulses to fuel dissent. Combined with fears of economic collapse, these factors united the population and leadership in their support for maintaining the Union and their place within it. Therefore, by the early 1990s, Turkmenistan remained largely insulated from the sweeping political and economic reforms affecting the other republics. However, as the Soviet Union began to unravel in 1991, Turkmenistan was reluctantly pushed toward independence, officially declaring its sovereignty on October 27, 1991. On the day Turkmenistan marked its independence, the nation also witnessed its inaugural presidential election, where Niyazov clinched 98.3% of the vote, an unsurprising outcome given he was the only candidate. 2 months later, the Communist Party of Turkmenistan formally disbanded, but this move was merely symbolic. The party simply renamed itself the Democratic Party of Turkmenistan, undergoing minimal actual change. As president of the newly independent nation, Niyazov maintained Soviet-era control mechanisms while most former Soviet republics were embracing major reforms. Under his leadership, the economy was kept under total government oversight, with comprehensive controls over prices, wages, exchange rates, and international trade. By May of 1992, under Niyazov's directive, Turkmenistan adopted a new constitution. Ostensibly, it established a presidential republic with checks and balances, and guaranteed freedoms of religion, expression, and property. In reality, however, it cemented Niyazov's complete authority over all aspects of Turkmen society. Leveraging his monopoly over broadcast media and the press, they were transformed into the official mouthpiece of the Turkmen Bashi, a term translating to the great leader of the Turkmen, which Niyazov had adopted as his new title. As cities, geographical landmarks, and infrastructure were renamed in honor of the Turkmen Bashi, a widespread cult of personality began to take shape. When confronted with comparisons to Stalin, Niyazov remarked, "But Stalin achieved his personality cult through repressive measures, whereas I achieved my popularity without conflicts." Alternative parties were banned as soon as they met membership criteria. Political opponents were eliminated by the secret police, and external information sources were banned or heavily censored, systematically isolating the population from the outside world. Niyazov justified these actions by arguing that economic stability must precede political diversity to prevent descending into anarchy. He claimed that with a decade of his leadership, Turkmenistan would avoid such a fate and enter an economic golden age. His plan for doing so was straightforward. With complete control over the world's fourth largest natural gas reserves and the ability to sell it at prices 300 times higher than during the Soviet era, Niyazov could appease Turkmenistan's modest population of 4 million by offering free gas, electricity, water, and heavily subsidized food. At the same time, he could enrich himself in the political elite while maintaining an extensive security and propaganda apparatus to ensure his continued rule. But despite Niyazov's optimistic plans, Turkmenistan's economy was entering a death spiral. Over 6 relentless years, the nation's economic output dwindled to less than half of its 1991 level. The fundamental issue facing Turkmenistan was the mismatch between its political independence and its economic autonomy. Stemming from the Soviet policy of regionalization, the country lacked the capacity to refine its raw resources and the infrastructure to sell its goods outside of Russia. This economic isolation is highlighted by the lack of even a railway link to neighboring Iran, despite its lands being just 15 miles from Ashgabat. Consequently, Turkmen gas and cotton could only be transported, sold, and processed through Russia. Amid these constraints, Russia exploited Turkmenistan's dependency by purchasing these commodities at significantly lower prices than those on the international market, paying with hard currency for only 50% of this already reduced value. The remainder was frequently paid in goods such as grain, and sometimes not at all. To further enhance its profit margins, Gazprom, Russia's state-owned energy giant and the exclusive buyer of Turkmen gas, strategically limited its purchases to 11 billion cubic meters per year, merely an eighth of Turkmenistan's pre-independence production levels. In 1997, the situation became dire as former Soviet republics, grappling with financial constraints, halted their gas payments entirely. Confronted with outstanding payments amounting to a staggering 80% of its GDP, Turkmenistan ceased gas exports entirely. Meanwhile, cotton production suffered a catastrophic 50% decline. The lack of hard currency severely restricted the import of essential supplies like fertilizers, tractors, and cotton picking machines, crippling the agricultural sector. This crisis was exacerbated by Niyazov's policy of making water free for citizens and farmers, which removed incentives for its efficient use, leading to severe water shortages and a 43% drop in output per acre over 7 years. With both of its key industries in ruins, the population's living standards began to deteriorate, threatening the stability of the regime. But the solution to these challenges was surprisingly simple. The country needed access to global markets by building alternative natural gas pipelines and railroads to bypass Russia's monopsony, a monopoly on the demand side of a market. Developing such infrastructure would bring in a surge of hard currency, which could then be strategically used to address input shortages and establish value-added industries for its raw resources. In 1996, the first rail connection with Iran was established, providing access to the Persian Gulf. The following year, a 125-mile pipeline was built to connect Turkmenistan's gas fields to Iran's remote northeast. Despite its modest annual capacity of 4 billion cubic meters, actual exports seldom reached even a third of this capacity, also hindered by Iran's ability to make payments. Building on these initial developments, a more ambitious proposal surfaced: a pipeline intended to transport 33 billion cubic meters of gas over 1,000 miles to Pakistan and India. But the route's need to traverse Taliban-controlled Afghanistan ultimately made the project unfeasible. A more promising proposal was the Trans-Caspian Pipeline, intended to transport gas beneath the Caspian Sea through Azerbaijan and Georgia to Turkey and onward to Western Europe. Yet maritime disputes with Azerbaijan stalled negotiations over transit fees, and financing issues indefinitely postponed the project. Despite these setbacks, the discussions led to significant diplomatic outcomes, including a meeting between Niyazov and US President Bill Clinton. These talks focused on energy deals and strategies for accessing global markets without depending on routes through Iran or Russia. Although these plans faltered as well, they were enough to compel Russia to sign a far more favorable gas agreement with Turkmenistan, driven by concerns over losing its influence over the country and the broader region. As the volume and value of gas exports to Russia skyrocketed, Turkmenistan's persistent trade deficit turned into a surplus by the year 2000. This turnaround was complemented by efforts to construct modern textile factories, repurpose farmland for domestic food production, and renovate an old Soviet oil refinery. These initiatives collectively fueled an enormous economic boom, positioning Turkmenistan as one of the fastest-growing economies on the planet. As the new century dawned, Niyazov would leverage these surging revenues and his extraordinary political strength to usher in his own personal utopia. On December 28, 1999, a newly elected parliament, composed solely of candidates handpicked by Niyazov, bestowed upon him the title of President for Life. Liberated from the need to even fake fair elections, Niyazov began to fully act upon his grandiose delusions. Assuming the role of spiritual and cultural arbiter of the Turkmen nation, Niyazov banned ballets, operas, beards, and cinemas for being insufficiently Turkmen, and closed all schools offering education in foreign languages. Additionally, he demanded that all state employees prove Turkmen racial purity traceable back 3 generations, prompting a mass exodus of the highly skilled Russian population. Following a personal health scare involving heart issues, Niyazov banned public smoking and constructed the infamous 37-kilometer Walk of Health, mandating that Turkmen citizens and politicians complete it annually. In 2001, he introduced his 400-page Runama, a pseudo-national Bible that emphasized Turkmen nationalism. Within its pages, Niyazov was depicted as a godlike figure who saved the nation from Soviet imperialism and was destined to usher in an era of prosperity. Initially dominating the shelves of bookstores and the desks of state offices, the Runama soon became required in mosques and churches, placed alongside every Quran and Bible. Its teachings were then integrated into the national education system, becoming not just required reading, but the central component of the curriculum. Prisoners were forced to swear an oath on it for release, doctors had to pledge their allegiance to it, and drivers, teachers, and civil servants were forced to pass examinations on its content. Those caught criticizing the book, even privately, faced up to 5 years in prison. As Niyazov's assertions about the Runama grew increasingly bizarre, he declared that reading the book 3 times would guarantee entry into heaven. Then, in a symbolic gesture of its supposed universal significance, a copy of the Runama was even launched into orbit, intended to, quote, conquer space. The book thus became the linchpin of a now perfected brainwashing apparatus. Across radio, television, and the newspapers, the Turkmenbashi, his family background, and his various supposed achievements were incessantly praised. Every broadcast began with an ominous pledge that the broadcaster's tongue will shrivel if he slanders the country, flag, or president. The cult of personality surrounding Niyazov reached such extremes that days, months, and even bread were renamed in honor of him, his mother, the Runama, and other symbols of Turkmen nationalism. His image saturated public and private spaces alike, displayed in enormous portraits and statues across the country and on every banknote, coin, and postage stamp. Even airplane cabins and passenger trains were required to feature his portrait, ensuring a constant, omnipresent reminder of his rule. But Niyazov's most ambitious endeavor was the transformation of Ashgabat into a testament of his wealth and power. Ignoring the potential for these vast gas revenues to improve the general welfare, he chose instead to import Italian marble for the construction of lavish monuments, gigantic mosques, luxury apartments, and gold-domed palaces for himself. Additionally, billions were blown on seemingly whimsical projects like an enormous desert lake that quickly evaporated, extravagant fountain displays, zoos with Arctic animals, and a towering 200-foot-tall arch topped with a gold statue of himself that rotates with the sun. In a striking example of excess, the city's main avenue was lined with 22 5-star hotels in a country that rarely allows visitors. To accommodate these prestige projects, entire neighborhoods were demolished, often without offering compensation or adequate alternative housing to the displaced residents. Hidden behind the unaffordable marble apartments, growing slums were filled with windowless, single-room homes, some crudely fashioned from old railway containers that baked during the scorching summers. Many inhabitants of these areas succumbed to opium addiction, a situation worsened by the unchecked influx of drugs from neighboring Afghanistan. In rural areas, remnants of Soviet-era policies persisted, with forced and child labor still prevalent in the cotton fields, creating a stark contrast between the opulent displays of wealth and the harsh realities faced by the general population. But resistance to Niyazov's regime from the general population remained virtually non-existent. Despite the widespread unemployment and low wages that plagued the economy, free gas, electricity, and water, along with heavily subsidized prices for food and other essentials, helped to quell discontent. This, coupled with relentless propaganda and a pervasive climate of fear, effectively stifled any grassroots opposition. But the situation escalated dramatically on the morning of November 25, 2002, when Niyazov's motorcade was ambushed, leading to a deadly shootout. This failed assassination and coup attempt triggered a sweeping purge of political elite and citizens alike. Hundreds of individuals and their families were subjected to show trials, received lengthy prison sentences, and subsequently vanished without a trace. In an atmosphere thick with paranoia, informers were recruited to eavesdrop on private conversations, psychotropic drugs were used to torture detainees, and roadblocks were established every few miles as a permanent measure. Car radios were banned to reduce background noise during surveillance, and all public gatherings, including weddings and funerals, now needed government approval. Further restrictions limited citizens' ability to leave the country, notably prohibiting women under 35 from traveling abroad unless they had 2 children, framed as a duty to perpetuate the Turkmen race. With his death in 2006, Niyazov left behind one of the most repressive totalitarian regimes on the planet. Citizens had virtually no rights. The average monthly income was a mere $60, and the few positive legacies of the Soviet era, healthcare and education, had all but been dismantled. Across the country, all hospitals, kindergartens, and libraries outside of the capital were shut down. Thousands of healthcare workers were replaced with untrained military personnel, the mandatory years of schooling were reduced, and hundreds of thousands had their pensions canceled or dramatically cut. As these measures plunged the population deeper into poverty, reports indicated that a significant portion of Turkmenistan's annual gas revenues, estimated at nearly $2 billion, were being diverted into the personal offshore accounts owned by the president. Despite leaving behind a substantial and potentially explosive power vacuum, having not named a successor to his all-encompassing cult of personality, there was a sense of cautious optimism upon Niyazov's death. This wasn't due to confidence in whoever would come next, but rather from the stark recognition that circumstances could hardly get any worse. On December 21, 2006, Gurbanguly Berdimuhamedov was appointed acting president, a decision that took everyone by surprise. According to the constitution, this role should have been filled by Ovesgeldi Atayev, the chairman of the People's Council. However, Atayev was quickly disqualified following a sudden and suspicious criminal investigation that led to his imprisonment. Berdi, who had previously served as Niyazov's personal dentist, had risen through the ranks of the political hierarchy to become the deputy chairman of the cabinet of ministers, where he was involved in dismantling the free healthcare system. While there were rumors that Berdi might be Niyazov's illegitimate son, it is more likely that he was chosen by the elite as a safe candidate who could maintain the status quo and ensure a smooth transition of power. In 2007, Berdi was elected president in an election widely regarded as rigged, flouting constitutional rules that barred the acting president from running. Inheriting the same absolute power as his predecessor, Berdi quickly began to reverse many of Niyazov's most extreme decrees, ushering in what he termed the era of New Renaissance. He reinstated pensions, sickness and maternity benefits, and lifted bans on opera, cinema, and ballet. He also reopened hospitals in the provincial areas and restored the original number of mandatory school years. Additionally, he reversed many of Niyazov's controversial renamings, including those of days and months. The Runama was phased out from public and educational spheres, and most of the portraits and statues of Niyazov were removed. However, these symbols of the past leader were gradually replaced with images and writings of Berdi, as he began to cultivate his own cult of personality. But the most important early development in Berdi's reign was the construction of a new gas pipeline in 2009. Spanning well over 1,000 miles, this pipeline traversed Uzbekistan and Kazakhstan, ultimately reaching China. By 2015, 2 additional pipelines were completed to China, collectively boasting a capacity of 55 billion cubic meters annually, surpassing any volume previously imported by Russia. This new connection to the Chinese market proved crucial for Turkmenistan when, in 2009, a combination of a Russian pipeline explosion and a sharp decline in European demand due to the financial crisis led Russia to significantly reduce both the volume and price of the Turkmen gas it purchased. This reduction swiftly strained relations, leading to a rapid deterioration in the trade relationship between the two countries. By 2015, China was purchasing 95% of Turkmenistan's gas exports. From 2007 to 2014, this shift in trade partners significantly boosted Turkmenistan's economy, which grew by a staggering 19% annually. The economy more than tripled in size, with annual revenues from gas exports alone approaching $10 billion. These revenues, bolstered by additional Chinese financing, enabled Berdy to follow in Niyazov's footsteps, blowing money on marble prestige projects, diverting funds into his private accounts, and implementing bizarre policies. This included a ban on satellite dishes and air conditioners in the capital because Berdy deemed them ugly, while he commissioned the construction of more monuments, personal palaces, and gold statues depicting himself, his horses, and his dogs. He also launched the development of the Avaza tourist zone on the Caspian Sea, envisioned as a Turkmen version of Las Vegas. This ambitious project included casinos, resorts, convention centers, sports complexes, and water parks, all of course made out of marble. Additionally, he oversaw the construction of a new $2.3 billion airport shaped like a falcon, designed to accommodate 14 million passengers annually as part of his plan to diversify into the tourism industry. He did not, however, make it easier for tourists to enter the country. Only 10,000 people are allowed in each year, most of whom are oil and gas experts. In 2012, claiming to usher in the era of might and happiness, he was re-elected with an implausibly high 97% of the vote. But Turkmenistan's excessive reliance on gas revenues quickly ushered in a period of shortages and stagnation instead. The impact of the shale revolution in the United States, coupled with OPEC's strategy to increase energy production to defend its market share, caused oil and gas prices to plummet. Turkmenistan's exports halved, wiping out a fifth of its economy. A budget surplus of 10% of GDP quickly turned into a 3% deficit, severely restricting the government's ability to import essential goods. This drastic economic downturn resulted in widespread shortages of basic necessities such as flour, cooking oil, and sugar, causing rationing and rising instances of starvation. Furthermore, mass layoffs in state-owned industries propelled the unemployment rate to an alarming 70%. In response to this crisis, the government permanently revoked citizens' free access to essentials and resorted to stealing funds from the population. For 6 months in 2017, 20% of monthly salaries from employees in the oil and gas sector were deducted to finance the hosting of the Asian Indoor and Martial Arts Games. In 2021, school administrations went as far as forcing orphans to redirect state-provided funds intended for their personal support to pay for school renovations. Moreover, the practice of forcing tens of thousands of students and workers to participate in unpaid cotton harvesting has continued unabated, persisting even today. During Berdy's tenure, there were no notable advances in political and social freedoms. The government continued to suppress or forcibly disappear political dissidents, and regular purges were conducted to eliminate perceived threats within the party. Access to external information was further restricted, travel constraints were tightened to stem the outpouring of skilled workers, and corruption ran rampant. By 2018, it was reported that officials had accumulated $23 billion in offshore accounts. Contrary to the prevailing belief that Berdy would remain in power until his death, he surprisingly stepped down from his leadership position in 2022. This move cleared the path for his son, Serdar, to successfully run for the presidency, securing a 73% majority in an election widely regarded as predetermined. Pledging to uphold his father's policies, Serdar's reign began on strong footing. Propelled by geopolitical tensions and China's emergence from lockdowns, natural gas prices and revenues began to surge once again. But Serdar's leadership was short-lived. doubts about his ability to steer the nation through a period of renewed interest in its gas resources began to emerge among the Turkmen elite, including his father. Just 11 months after stepping down as president, Berdi's role as chairman of the upper house of parliament was elevated to the national leader of the Turkmen people, superseding his son's authority and dampening hopes for real change. From its early days as a land of nomads wandering the desert, through its forceful incorporation into the Russian and then Soviet